The sun crept lazily over the ridge, casting long gold ribbons across the untouched stretch of land Ethan Cole had called home since childhood. 40 acres of gently rolling earth, framed by wild oaks and dotted with forgotten fence posts, slumbered under the crisp morning light. For most, it was just empty countryside on the outskirts of Maplewood, a fast-growing suburb where HOAs sprouted faster than trees. But for Ethan, this land was more than property, it was legacy. His father had farmed this soil with weathered hands, and his grandfather had built the stone well that still stood by the old barn. He never saw himself as wealthy, though on paper he owned one of the most valuable undeveloped parcels left in the county. He simply saw himself as the caretaker of his family's story. When the letter came from the Maplewood Estates HOA, Ethan didn't think much of it at first. The board president, Karen Whitmore, was known locally for her sharp smile and even sharper tone, a woman who could turn a simple fence height violation into a full-scale neighborhood scandal. The letter was polite but firm. The HOA wanted to expand its luxury subdivision, and his acreage was perfect for the next phase of development. Ethan read the offer twice, then folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. They were offering market price, not understanding that no amount of money could replace heritage. A few days later, he called Karen to decline. She sounded almost rehearsed, repeating phrases like progress, community vision, and shared prosperity. When he refused again, she said coolly, "You may want to reconsider, Mr. Cole. Developments coming one way or another." Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Ethan spent his mornings tending the overgrown fields, patching the roof of the old barn, and enjoying the peace that had always defined his land. Then one morning, a low rumble broke that peace. Heavy machinery growled in the distance. Dust rose in thick clouds beyond the tree line. He drove his pickup toward the sound, his stomach tightening with every turn of the dirt road. What he saw made his breath catch: rows of survey stakes, fresh tire tracks, and bulldozers tearing through the far section of his property. Men in hard hats moved with casual confidence, marking boundaries as if the earth belonged to them. Ethan parked beside the site manager, a burly man with a clipboard and reflective vest. "Morning," Ethan said calmly, though his voice carried steel beneath it. "You mind telling me what you're doing on my property?" The manager blinked, confused, then chuckled. "Sir, this is part of the Pine Meadows Phase 3 project. HOA's property. You might be mistaken." Ethan frowned. "I've lived here all my life. This is my land. Always has been." The man scratched his head, checked a map on his clipboard, and shrugged. "All I know is the paperwork came from the county. It's cleared for development. You can talk to the board if there's a mix-up." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp spilling over stacks of old documents, deeds, survey maps, tax receipts. Every page confirmed what he already knew: the land was still legally his. But the next day, he drove to the county clerk's office to check the records. The clerk, a young man with coffee-stained sleeves, frowned as he pulled up the database. "That's strange," he muttered. "Looks like the title was transferred 6 months ago to the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association." Ethan's heart dropped. "Transferred how?" he demanded. The clerk hesitated, lowering his voice. "It says it was a voluntary sale, notarized under your name." For a long moment, Ethan stared at the monitor, disbelief warring with rage. He hadn't sold anything. The signature on that document wasn't his. Someone had forged the deed. He requested copies of every file and walked out into the glaring afternoon light, the papers crumpling in his fist. Most people would have stormed straight into the HOA office or called the police. But Ethan wasn't most people. He knew that a confrontation without proof would only get buried under legal jargon and HOA influence. Karen Whitmore was powerful, connected, and ruthless when cornered. So instead of fighting right away, Ethan made a choice that would define everything to come: he would wait. Over the next several months, Ethan turned into a ghost on his own property. The HOA's construction crews expanded across the fields, leveling the land where his father once plowed and pouring foundations where the barn's shadow still fell. Ethan watched from a distance, documenting everything. He took photographs of boundary markers, drone footage of the cleared lots, and even managed to befriend a few construction workers. They thought he was just a curious local farmer. But every casual conversation, every leaked blueprint, every document he could gather went into a thickening binder of evidence. He learned that Karen herself had pushed the project through the county's fast-track approval program, waving forged signatures as proof of ownership. She was careful, but not careful enough. Ethan's silence confused everyone. Neighbors wondered why he didn't stop the development. Karen grew bolder, bragging at town meetings about acquiring the last piece of land standing in the way of progress. When reporters asked about the project, she flashed that confident smile and said, "We're building the future of Maplewood." Ethan would see her on local TV and almost laugh. She thought she'd buried him under her influence, but in truth, she was building her empire on sand. Every wall, every road, every house stood on the foundation of his patience. By the time the first homes were completed, the fields that once whispered with wind now echoed with the sound of nail guns and laughter. Families began moving in, unaware that their shiny new driveways sat on land never legally sold. Ethan would sometimes drive the outer road at sunset, watching children play where his father's crops once grew. He wasn't bitter, he was deliberate. Because when the time came, he wanted everything finished. No excuses. No partial justice. He wanted them to see the full scale of what they'd stolen before he took it all back. One evening, as the last light faded, Ethan stood at the old stone well with his binder in hand. The hum of construction had faded into distant music and laughter from the new homes. He ran his fingers over the cracked stones, the same ones his grandfather had laid generations ago. They think it's theirs, he thought quietly. Let them believe that. He closed the binder, looked toward the horizon, and allowed himself a small, knowing smile. They'd built their kingdom on his soil, and when the time came, he'd simply pull the ground out from under them. By the time summer rolled around, Ethan Cole's once silent land had become a miniature city. Where fields once swayed with golden grass, there now stood skeletons of wooden frames, steel beams, and freshly poured foundations. The Maplewood Estates Phase 3 banners fluttered proudly at the new entrance, boasting slogans like "Luxury Living in the Heart of Community" and "Another HOA Success Story." Ethan passed that sign almost every day on his way into town. Each time, the words stung a little less, replaced by something colder, sharper: patience. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating. The HOA poured millions into the project. Karen Whitmore appeared constantly in local papers, her name shining under headlines that praised her leadership and visionary community expansion. She wore designer blazers to construction meetings, always flanked by city officials who were more than happy to smile for cameras. Ethan watched it all unfold like a silent witness. To the world, he was just the quiet man in the pickup truck who sometimes parked by the construction fence, sipping coffee as bulldozers roared in the distance. To Karen, he was an irrelevant relic of the old town, a man too slow to keep up with progress. She didn't know that every nail driven, every blueprint filed, every fence post planted was being catalogued by the man she had tried to erase. Ethan spent his days gathering information. He bought a high-end drone and flew it discreetly over the property, capturing the evolving development in crisp detail. He kept every date-stamped image, every zoning permit copy he could find, and every local newspaper clipping that praised the successful land acquisition. He befriended construction workers by showing up with coffee and donuts, asking about schedules, progress, and contracts. Most were happy to talk. They had no idea that their casual chatter, "Yeah, HOA's fast-tracking this whole phase," or "the president said they saved a ton on land cost," was quietly building his case. But beneath the calm surface, there were moments when Ethan's composure almost cracked. Once, he came home to find one of the bulldozers had crossed onto the edge of his still-owned adjoining parcel, flattening a line of old oak saplings his father had planted. He stood there for a long time, hands trembling slightly, staring at the tire tracks carved into the soil. The anger was there, alive and sharp, but he didn't let it take over. He took photos, measured the exact coordinates, and logged them in his binder. He reminded himself of the plan: let them finish. The more they built, the deeper their mistake would run. As the months turned into a year, the development took full shape. Smooth asphalt streets wound through neat rows of homes painted in soft suburban shades: beige, cream, and slate blue. Ethan knew them all by lot number and square footage. He had memorized the site map like a general studying enemy territory. Children played in driveways while real estate agents waved flags, announcing that Phase 3 was now open for residents. The HOA hosted an open house event that drew local media coverage. Karen, standing under a ribbon-cutting arch with her signature pearl necklace, told reporters, "This marks a new era for Maplewood, community, growth, and unity." Ethan was there, standing among the crowd, blending in with curious visitors. He kept his hat low, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he watched her bask in the spotlight. She noticed him once, just for a moment, her smile faltering slightly before she turned away. Maybe she remembered his refusal to sell. Maybe she thought he was just a bitter man clinging to what used to be his. Either way, she had no idea that his quiet attendance was not resentment, it was reconnaissance. Later that summer, Ethan began to dig deeper. He hired a title attorney, a quiet professional named Linda Grayson, and shared everything. She flipped through the binder in disbelief. "You've been building a case for over a year," she said. Ethan nodded. "I wasn't ready until now. I wanted them to finish what they started." Linda leaned back, impressed. "You're sitting on a goldmine of evidence. If what you're showing me is right, every single house they built sits on property you never legally sold." Meanwhile, the HOA began to celebrate its record-breaking expansion. Karen, in particular, was intoxicated with her own success. She'd even had a small marble plaque installed at the community's main entrance, developed under the leadership of HOA President Karen Whitmore, 2025. The plaque stood right next to an oak tree, one that Ethan had planted with his father years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sometimes, he'd walk the outer trail that ran behind the homes and watch the families barbecuing on weekends, the laughter of children echoing across the land that once grew wheat. There was no hate in him for them. They were innocent. The real target of his patience was the organization that had stolen from him with a pen. One evening, as dusk settled over the freshly paved streets, Ethan parked his truck near the main road and watched the neighborhood lights flicker on. 96 homes, he thought. 96 titles, all resting on false ownership. Every mailbox, every lamppost, every manicured lawn was a monument to someone else's arrogance. He flipped open the binder on his lap, the pages worn and heavy. A single document sat on top, the original deed, handwritten by his grandfather in 1957, sealed by the county and passed down through generations. It was the one thing they couldn't forge, couldn't replicate, couldn't erase. Over time, word began to circulate that Ethan was preparing something. Contractors whispered that the quiet man was hiring lawyers. The HOA board grew uneasy, but Karen dismissed it publicly. "He's bluffing," she told them during a meeting, laughing over a glass of wine. "He wouldn't dare take on an HOA this big. We have the city behind us." Her confidence infected the others. They believed the land was theirs. After all, they had built on it, improved it, paid taxes on it. What could one man possibly do? Ethan let them think that way. In fact, he wanted them to. Because every dollar they poured into those homes, every improvement they made, every sale they finalized, only increased the value of his land. He wasn't just watching them build homes. He was watching them build his fortune, brick by brick. On a warm September night, Ethan stood by his porch overlooking the glowing horizon. The hum of traffic from the new neighborhood carried faintly through the air. He sipped his coffee, thinking of his father's voice, "Never fight a thief while he's still stealing, son. Wait until he thinks he's won." That night, Ethan smiled. The waiting was almost over. The houses were complete, the HOA was proud, and the entire community was celebrating a success built on stolen soil. Soon, he'd walk into their world not as the man they dismissed, but as the man who owned everything under their feet. The day of the Maplewood Estates Phase 3 ribbon-cutting ceremony arrived beneath a cloudless blue sky, the kind of day developers dream about. White tents lined the freshly paved cul-de-sac, and a small crowd gathered under a giant banner that read, "A vision realized, Maplewood's future begins here." The HOA board stood proudly at the front, flanked by city officials, reporters, and curious residents. Karen Whitmore was in her element, her smile perfectly polished for the cameras. She wore her signature cream blazer and pearl necklace, the image of suburban authority. Ethan Cole parked his truck just beyond the crowd and leaned against the hood, watching silently. He had no reason to be there, at least not officially, yet something about witnessing the moment appealed to him. The woman who had taken everything stood before microphones, basking in applause, completely unaware that her empire was built on the shifting sands of a stolen deed. Karen began her speech, her voice confident and rehearsed. "When I look at this community," she said, gesturing toward the neat rows of houses, "I see the American dream, families coming together, building lives, growing roots. This land represents our shared progress, our unity, and our future." Ethan almost laughed under his breath. "Our land," she said. The irony was rich. She thanked the board members, the construction company, and the county planning office, each name greeted with polite clapping. Then she added, "We'd like to give special thanks to those who made this land available for development. Without your cooperation, this would not have been possible." Ethan stepped forward through the crowd, slow and deliberate. Karen's words stumbled when she noticed him, a familiar face she hadn't expected to see. For a split second, her composure wavered. Then, she smiled tightly. "Oh, Mr. Cole," she said into the microphone. "Nice of you to join us. It's always a pleasure to see former landowners celebrating progress with us." Ethan returned the smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "Oh, I'm not here as a guest," he said calmly. "Just wanted to see how my tenants are settling in." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Karen blinked. "I'm sorry, your tenants," she repeated, forcing a laugh. Ethan only smiled, tipped his hat, and walked away, leaving a silence that buzzed like static. 2 weeks later, the silence shattered for good. Every HOA board member received a thick envelope by certified mail. Inside, a notice of civil action, Cole versus Maplewood Estates HOA. The claim alleged illegal possession, fraudulent conveyance, and unauthorized construction on private land. The HOA's attorney, a confident man named Thomas Blackwell, called an emergency meeting that night. "This is ridiculous," he said, tossing the papers on the table. "We have county approval, deeds, permits. He doesn't have a case." Karen nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Then we'll fight it. He's bluffing." But Ethan wasn't bluffing. The first hearing took place in the county courthouse on a gray Monday morning. The room was modest, oak benches, pale walls, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Ethan sat beside his attorney, Linda Grayson, calm and composed. Across the aisle, Karen sat rigidly behind her lawyer, whispering furiously. A handful of HOA members filled the gallery, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. Judge Morrison, a stern but fair woman in her 50s, called the court to order. "This is Cole versus Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association," she said. "Mr. Cole, you claim ownership of land currently developed and occupied by the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "And you allege the HOA constructed 96 residential properties on this land without your consent?" "Yes, ma'am." The HOA's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, these claims are baseless. The association lawfully acquired the land through proper channels over a year ago. I have copies of the transfer deed, notarized and recorded." He handed the documents to the clerk. The judge studied them briefly. "Mr. Cole, do you dispute these records?" Linda stood. "We do, Your Honor. In fact, we have reason to believe the deed presented by the defense is a forgery." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her manicured fingers gripping the table. Blackwell smirked. "Forgery? That's quite the accusation." Linda didn't flinch. "Not an accusation, a fact. If the court will allow, we'd like to submit the original deed, dated 1957, and every subsequent renewal showing continuous ownership under the Cole family." The clerk approached the bench with Ethan's binder. Inside was the yellowed parchment, still bearing the county seal and his grandfather's signature. The judge compared the two documents side by side. The room fell silent except for the faint rustle of papers. "These signatures are not identical," she finally said, eyes narrowing. Linda continued. "Your Honor, we also retained a certified forensic document examiner. Her report confirms that the signature on the HOA's version of the deed was electronically traced from a prior document. Furthermore, county registry logs show the transfer was filed from a clerk's terminal after business hours, using credentials belonging to a staff member who no longer works there." Karen's face drained of color. Her lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. "Quiet," she said sharply. Continue, Ms. Grayson. Linda pulled another file from her briefcase. In addition, Your Honor, we have photographic and digital evidence showing that Mr. Cole repeatedly notified both the HOA and county officials about construction activity on his property. Those notifications were ignored or dismissed without proper review. The defendants were fully aware of his ownership before proceeding. The judge turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, you had knowledge that construction was occurring on your land? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan said simply. And you chose not to stop it? Ethan nodded once. I wanted them to finish. The courtroom went dead quiet. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. The judge looked at him, brows furrowed. You wanted them to finish? Yes, ma'am, Ethan said. I figured if they wanted my land so badly, they might as well improve it first. A few people in the gallery stifled gasps. Karen's lawyer stammered, Your Honor, this is absurd. He's admitting he allowed the development. Linda shot back. He allowed nothing, counsel. He documented their trespass and forgery meticulously for over a year. And now every improvement, every structure, every square foot built belongs, by law, to Mr. Cole. Judge Morrison leaned back, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. The court finds sufficient evidence of deed forgery and unlawful development. Title ownership is hereby reaffirmed under Ethan Cole. All 96 properties built on said land are legally his until further resolution. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do this. People live there. The judge's gaze hardened. Perhaps you should have considered that before building on land you didn't own. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just turned slightly toward Karen and said quietly, Told you I'd hold on to the land. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. One shouted, Mr. Cole, how does it feel to win against the HOA? Ethan paused at the steps, the sun glinting off the papers in his hand. They built on my land, he said simply. I just let them finish the job. And with that, he walked down the courthouse steps, leaving Karen and her empire collapsing behind him. The ruling spread through Maplewood Estates like wildfire. By noon the next day, every homeowner in Phase 3 knew the shocking truth. Their million-dollar houses, freshly painted and landscaped, weren't legally theirs. They were built on Ethan Cole's land. Overnight, the neighborhood's social media pages exploded with panic. Posts ranged from disbelief to fury. This can't be real. Does this mean we're trespassing? Karen better have an explanation. By the third day, the HOA clubhouse was packed to bursting. The board had called an emergency meeting, but the word emergency didn't quite capture the chaos inside. People shouted over each other, waving papers and demanding answers. A young couple near the front looked ready to cry. A man in a polo shirt slammed his fist on a table and yelled, We spent our life savings on this place. What do you mean the land isn't ours? Others hurled questions at Karen Whitmore, who stood at the podium with a trembling smile, trying desperately to maintain her composure. Please, everyone, Karen said, raising her manicured hands, let's remain calm. This is a temporary legal misunderstanding. Our attorneys are already preparing an appeal. But her voice shook. For the first time, the mask of control cracked. The residents weren't buying it. A woman from the back shouted, You said everything was approved. You said the land deal was solid. Karen snapped back. It was. Someone must have manipulated records. We're the victims here. That was when an older man near the door stood up and said loudly, The victim's name is Ethan Cole. The room went silent. He continued, You stole from that man. And now he owns every house you built. Outside, Ethan's pickup truck was parked across the street. He hadn't been invited to the meeting, but he didn't need to be. The HOA could shout all it wanted. The law had already spoken. From the cab, he could see the chaos through the windows. People pacing, Karen clutching her papers like a lifeline. He didn't smile. Revenge wasn't about laughter for him. It was about silence, justice, and watching arrogance unravel under its own weight. Later that week, eviction notices began appearing in mailboxes, not from the county, but from Ethan's attorney. Each letter was formal and polite. Notice of tenancy adjustment, effective immediately, all residents of Maplewood Estates Phase 3 are occupying property owned by Mr. Ethan Cole. Please contact our office regarding leasing agreements or relocation options. The panic that followed was unmatched. News vans parked at the entrance gates. Reporters camped on lawns. The local paper ran a headline in bold black letters. HOA builds on wrong land. Court hands entire subdivision to original owner. Karen became the face of humiliation. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Angry homeowners, reporters, lawyers, even former friends demanding answers. When she stepped outside, cameras followed her every move. Her once proud smile was gone, replaced by dark circles and a hollow stare. The board turned on her almost immediately, blaming her for everything. During a tense meeting, one member shouted, "You told us the deal was airtight." Another added, "You forged signatures, Karen. Don't act like you didn't know." She broke down, insisting she had trusted the wrong people. The developers, the surveyors, the county clerks, anyone but herself. But no one believed her anymore. The HOA board dissolved in disgrace within weeks. The subdivision's once pristine lawns grew wild, the neighborhood sign vandalized with spray paint, owned by Cole. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed calm through it all. When reporters finally caught up with him for an interview, he stood by his fence line, hands in his pockets, speaking softly. "They thought owning land meant owning people," he said. "They forgot that paper doesn't change soil. My family's name is still under it." The community tried to negotiate. Some residents, desperate to keep their homes, offered to buy back the land. Ethan listened politely to each proposal but never accepted. Instead, he presented an alternative: leases. He would allow them to stay, but under his terms, as tenants. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The HOA, which once fined people for mailbox colors and driveway stains, now had to pay monthly rent to the man they had mocked as a stubborn old farmer. For most of them, the rent was manageable, a symbolic repayment for the arrogance of their leaders. But for Karen, the terms were different. When her lawyer approached Ethan privately to discuss her house, he simply said, "That one's not for lease." She was forced to move out within 30 days. The same cameras that once recorded her speeches now filmed her leaving the neighborhood she once ruled, her boxes stacked in the back of a borrowed SUV. In the weeks that followed, Ethan transformed from a quiet recluse to a local legend. People in town whispered his name with admiration, the man who outsmarted an entire HOA by doing nothing more than waiting and keeping records. Some called him a hero, others, a genius. But Ethan didn't seek praise. He was already planning the future of his newly reclaimed community. He started with the neglected green spaces, hiring landscapers to plant native trees and wildflowers. He removed the HOA's rigid rule signs, no lawn decorations, no street parking, no pets over 40 pounds, and replaced them with a simple one: respect the land, respect each other. One afternoon, while overseeing the planting of saplings, a young couple approached him. They'd been among the first families to move in, the same couple he'd once seen laughing on their porch. The woman said softly, "We just wanted to thank you for letting us stay. We didn't know what they'd done." Ethan nodded. "You weren't the problem," he said. "The land remembers who treats it right." That night, he stood at the edge of the property under the soft glow of the streetlights, his streetlights now. The neighborhood was quiet, humbled, and peaceful. He thought of his father again, and how proud he would have been to see justice done not through anger, but through patience and proof. The land had outlasted greed, just as it always would. Across the road, the marble plaque bearing Karen's name still stood, cracked and chipped, half covered in ivy. Ethan walked over to it, crouched down, and brushed the dirt from its surface. The inscription read, "Developed under the leadership of HOA President Karen Whitmore, 2025. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up a small rock and began to carve gently beneath the text. When he was done, the new inscription read, "Owned by Ethan Cole." He stood, looked across the rows of houses now lit softly in the night, and whispered, "You finished the hard part for me." Then he turned, hands in his pockets, and walked back home, the only home in Maplewood that had truly stood the test of time. Months passed since the court ruling that changed everything in Maplewood Estates. What was once the proudest, most tightly controlled neighborhood in the county had transformed into something else entirely. Quieter, humbler, and, in many ways, more human. The once glittering homes still stood, but without the glossy perfection Karen's HOA had enforced. Kids' bikes leaned against fences, flower pots of mismatched colors sat on porches, and laughter carried through open windows in the evenings. For the first time, Maplewood felt alive. Ethan Cole walked through the winding streets one early morning, the sun barely cresting over the horizon. The dew glistened on the grass, and the air smelled like pine and fresh soil, the scent of his childhood. He carried a thermos of black coffee, his old flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He stopped by the new community garden, once a restricted, decorative lawn zone under the HOA, now thriving with tomatoes, squash, and herbs planted by residents who'd stayed on as tenants. He watched a few of them already at work, the young couple who had thanked him months ago, a retired teacher, and a teenager spraying water over the plants like they were gold. They waved when they saw him. "Morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning," Ethan replied, tipping his hat. "Looks like the garden's coming along." The teacher smiled. "Never thought I'd say this, but living under you is better than living under them." Ethan chuckled softly. "I don't plan to run anyone's life. Just the land." He continued down the street, stopping near the clubhouse. It used to be Karen Whitmore's fortress, where she held her grand meetings, dictated neighborhood rules, and demanded compliance from everyone who dared to question her. Now, the building had been repurposed into something far simpler, a shared hall. Residents held potlucks there, craft fairs, even movie nights. The marble sign that once read Maplewood HOA Headquarters had been replaced with a hand-painted wooden one that read simply Maplewood Commons. Ethan entered quietly. Inside, volunteers were setting up for a Saturday farmers market. One of them, a middle-aged man in a denim jacket, looked up from arranging jars of honey. "Morning, Ethan," he said. "Got the new lease papers for the last 3 homes. Everyone's signed." Ethan nodded. "Good. Then that's all of them." It had taken time, nearly 6 months, but every homeowner had either signed a lease under fair terms or moved away. Most chose to stay. Ethan's conditions were reasonable: a modest monthly rent, no restrictive rules, and a promise that he would maintain the land's integrity. In return, he asked for respect, not for him, but for the soil his father and grandfather had worked. For those who left, Ethan didn't hold grudges. Some sold their homes to new families, others to small business owners who wanted peace. What mattered to Ethan was that, for the first time in years, the land was being used by people who valued it, not those who saw it as an accessory to status. Word of Ethan's quiet victory spread far beyond Maplewood. Journalists called him the man who outsmarted the HOA, while law students analyzed his case as a study in property rights and due diligence. One university even invited him to speak to their urban development class, but he declined. "I'm not a lecturer," he told the reporter who called. "I just read what was mine and didn't let anyone take it." Still, his story became something of a local legend. Farmers from neighboring towns dropped by to shake his hand. Developers treated him with newfound respect. Even the county planning department implemented stricter checks on land transfers, an unspoken acknowledgement of how badly they'd failed him before. Then, one gray afternoon in early spring, Ethan received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, elegant, familiar. The return address, Karen Whitmore. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, the paper smelled faintly of perfume, and the words were carefully chosen. "Ethan, I've lost everything: the board, the house, the trust of people I once called friends. I won't pretend I didn't deserve it. But I wanted to say something I never did before. I'm sorry. Not just for the land, but for the way I treated you. I thought power meant control. You showed me it means patience. I hope Maplewood becomes what it should have been from the start. Karen." Ethan read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in his desk drawer beside his father's old land deed. He didn't feel triumph or bitterness, just a quiet sense of closure. People like Karen didn't often apologize, and for all her wrongs, she had finally understood the truth too late. That evening, the community gathered for the first Maplewood Harvest Festival, an event that symbolized renewal. Lanterns hung from trees, kids ran with sparklers, and the scent of grilled food drifted through the air. Ethan sat at a picnic table, surrounded by neighbors, not tenants, not subordinates, but people. The young couple who tended the garden handed him a plate of pie. The retired teacher poured him a glass of cider. Someone started a small band, and laughter echoed through the open space where the old HOA sign used to stand. One of the residents leaned over and said, "You know, Ethan, it's funny. We used to think this neighborhood was perfect because it was clean and strict. But it's better now. It's ours, in a real way." Ethan smiled. Perfection doesn't grow things. Life does. As the night deepened, he stepped away from the crowd for a moment, walking down the quiet road toward the hill overlooking the subdivision. The moonlight washed over the rooftops, homes that once stood as monuments of greed, now softened by community. He took a slow breath, the kind that fills your lungs with the weight of years and releases it with peace. At the edge of the hill stood an old oak tree, one his father had planted decades ago. Ethan placed his hand on its bark and whispered, "We did it, Dad. They tried to bury us, but we were the roots." Below him, Maplewood shimmered, not with the artificial glow of status, but with the warmth of belonging. It wasn't about deeds or fences anymore. It was about something deeper, a truth that no HOA, no greed, no arrogance could ever rewrite. Land remembers who respects it. When Ethan walked back to the festival, someone had started playing an old country tune. A few people called him over to dance. He hesitated, then joined, moving awkwardly but smiling wider than he had in years. For the first time since the fight began, he allowed himself to feel joy, not because he'd won, but because the land had healed, and so had he. By midnight, the lights dimmed, and neighbors began heading home. Ethan lingered a little longer, looking over the garden plots, the laughter fading into the distance, the stars above as steady as ever. He whispered the same words his father used to tell him whenever things went wrong. "Patience, boy. The land always tells the truth in time." And this time it finally had.